Prologue. Far beyond the pack grounds, beyond the reach of their territory and the quiet safety they had fought to rebuild, the campus sat still beneath the night, its stone walls cold and deliberate under the moonlight, every tower and corridor holding its silence like it had been built to keep secrets inside it. And deep within the administrative wing, behind closed doors and old wood darkened with age, Charles von Berg stood at the window of his office with one hand resting lightly against the frame, his pale gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance, seeing far more than anything that sat on the surface of the dark as something pressed against his awareness again, subtle but wrong, something that didn't belong to the order he had spent years maintaining. And he didn't move when the door opened behind him without a knock. Rosemary stepping inside with the same controlled presence she always carried, closing the door quietly as she said,
"You felt it."
Not as a question, but as confirmation. And Charles let the silence stretch just long enough before answering.
"Yes."
His voice even, controlled, while her attention shifted toward the same stretch of darkness beyond the glass. Her posture still, but her focus sharper than usual as she said,
"I thought you handled this 18 years ago."
And that was what pulled his attention, not abruptly, not with any visible reaction, but enough that he turned his head slightly, his gaze settling on her with more focus. Then Charles says,
"I did."
He said calm, certain, and Rosemary didn't hesitate, didn't soften it.
"Then why does her blood still feel active?"
And that settled heavier than anything else that had been said. Not dramatic, not forced, just there. And Charles turned fully then, slow and deliberate, his attention landing on her as something colder moved beneath the surface of his control, not breaking out of it, just sharpening it. He said nothing at first, his gaze holding hers for a second longer than necessary before shifting away again, back toward the mountains, toward the dark stretch of land where the disturbance had come from. And this time, he didn't dismiss it, didn't push it aside, because something in it had changed. Something had answered, and the silence between them stretched, controlled, but no longer empty, as Rosemary remained where she stood, watching him, waiting, not for reassurance, but for truth. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was lower, quieter, in a way that carried more weight.
"If she were alive, I would know."
And Rosemary's expression didn't change, but her attention didn't waver either as she said,
"Would you?"
Not as a challenge, not as doubt, but as something that sat just beneath both, and that was enough to settle something deeper into the room, something that hadn't been acknowledged until now. And Charles's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he stepped away from the window, crossing the room without rushing as he came to a stop near the desk, his fingers brushing lightly against the surface before stilling as his gaze dropped briefly to the old book resting there, untouched for years, but never moved, never forgotten. And when he looked back up, there was no hesitation left in his voice, only control.
"Bring Christopher and Christina to me tomorrow,"
he said, even, final, and Rosemary gave a small nod. turning toward the door before pausing just slightly.
You think this involves them?
And Charles didn't answer right away. His gaze already shifting back toward the mountains, toward the place where something had begun to move. And when he did speak, it was measured, deliberate,
I think something has started that should have stayed buried.
and when the door closed behind her, the room fell still again, but it wasn't empty anymore, and Charles remained where he stood, unmoving, his hand curling slowly against the edge of the desk as the pressure lingered in the air, subtle but undeniable, and far beyond the campus, beyond the reach of anything he could control from where he stood. The mountains held their silence while the night pressed deeper around the pack, and beneath it all, something old had already begun to wake.
Confused yet again. As you should be. The beginning was just that. The beginning. Think a prologue tells you everything. It doesn't. Twisted Worlds, Legacy and Bloodlines. Second installment, available now on Barnes & Nobles.